I understand we have one more coming, so we'll, I think we can get underway. The meeting of the Board of Regents, State of Iowa for September 25th, 2017 will come to order. I'll begin by calling the roll. Regent Bates.
Present.
Regent Butker.
Present.
Regent Dakovich.
Present.
Regent Dunkel.
Present.
Regent Johnson.
Present.
Regent McKibben.
Present.
Regent Sahai.
Present.
I'll note that Regent County is not here, but we know she's on the way. Regent Richards is present. We have a quorum and the meeting can proceed. Efficiencies and reallocations at the universities are a critical component of proper stewardship of state resources. I thought it would be appropriate to give our university leaders an opportunity to discuss savings and efficiency efforts at their respective institutions. I would like to start with Interim President Allen.
Good morning. Thank you, President Richards. Look forward to presenting our case for efficiencies and having a discussion with you. Like the Board of Regents, we at Iowa State recognize that college is a significant investment for our students and our families and their families. We also understand the substantial investments made by the state, and in particular the taxpayers of Iowa, to support higher education. Accordingly, it is our obligation and our commitment to use each and every dollar as wisely as possible. Efficiency is part of our culture at Iowa State. We have three main objectives today. We will update the board on a number of efforts we have undertaken to operate efficiently and ensure we're getting good value for the investments that we make. Secondly, we'll look at how we stack up relative to our peer institutions in terms of administrative spend per student served. And third, we will provide an overview of our ongoing efforts as well as plans we intend to implement in order to continue to use resources wisely and in ways which enable us to meet the goals established in our strategic plan. In an attempt to accurately and appropriately capture efficiencies across the campus, I worked with senior leaders and their teams to identify more than 115 projects at the university that either A, reduced cost, or B, enabled us to avoid cost we would have expected to incur without the efficiency-related task or project being implemented. While this is certainly not a comprehensive list or inventory of all things efficiency-related on campus, I do believe it will give you an appreciation for just how seriously we've taken the charge to operate more efficiently, particularly since the TIER initiative was launched in 2014. That said, the list of efficiencies that we have before you include areas outside the TIER area. As we engaged in the review, we identified several categories for the savings examples. They are, first, salary and fringe-related cost. Universities are labor-intensive, particularly land-grant AAU universities that are student-centered. With more than 36,000 students, our faculty, staff, and administrators work diligently to serve our students both inside and outside the classroom and support all functions of our vibrant, bustling campus. Accordingly, this is our largest spend category and must always be carefully managed to maximize the return on investment. Second category is operational. This category refers to everything from purchasing goods and supplies to professional development, equipment, travel, printing, communications. And third, facilities. The last category is broadly referred to as facilities, but essentially refers to efforts that enable us to maximize the built environment at Iowa State to better meet the institutional mission. Next, we identified if the savings generated would be one-time or if it would generate recurring savings. This is particularly important as you look to reallocate savings to other institutional priorities. With respect to salary and current fringe-related benefits, we identified more than $6.1 million in savings. Almost all these are recurring. A few examples include the College of Design underwent a reorganization to centralize leadership and administrative support. The annual savings totaled $340,000 for the college. Another example is the College of Engineering and College of Liberal Arts and Sciences joint venture on online education. This has streamlined processes and administrative functions while reducing duplicated services and personnel cost. Engineering and LES are saving a combined $114,000 each year. And Iowa State Police have worked to reduce labor cost and overtime hours by adjusting staff schedules. This is saving the department more than $50,000 per year. Next is the operational category. Here we identified more than $15.5 million in savings, with the lion's share of the savings recurring annually. More than half of the savings in this category were achieved in procurement services, which was a major component of the TIER initiative. Our new Dell contract, for example, has resulted in a cost reduction of more than $4.1 million when comparing our negotiated contract price with the retail price. Another example is our strategic move to standardize voice technology. I think that means phone service. The savings from this are based on the decrease in monthly recurring charges for university communication system. That recurring savings is $160,000. Finally, in the facilities category, we identified almost $1 million in recurring savings. The most impactful activity in this category has been our ability to reduce the cost of our campus energy consumption. We were able to do this through more efficient operation of the campus cogeneration plant and new and existing building efficiency efforts. In total, approximately $22.7 million in savings have been identified, with almost $20 million recurring annually. Again, this is not a comprehensive calculation of our efficiency savings since 2014. However, it does give you a good sense of our strong commitment to this effort. And just as we have been committed to achieving savings, we have also been committed to reinvesting them into activities which align with one or more of the mission-focused priorities of Iowa State's 5-year plan. Because of our diligent efforts in the efficiency area, we have lower administrative costs than our peer group members. This slide you might remember from our August 9th presentation, which highlights the American Council of Trustees and Alumni Report on higher education cost. It looks at the amount schools spend on administrative staff compared to instructional staff using IPED's data. To give you a sense, the median spending on administrative staff for schools similar to Iowa State is 17 cents for every dollar spent on instructional staff. In FY16, Iowa State's spending on administrative staff was 12 cents for every dollar spent on instructional staff, and last year, FY17, that dropped even further to just 10 cents on the dollar. Moving forward, efficiency will remain a key priority for Iowa State. We will continue to work hard to generate efficiencies by doing things we do most cost effectively, and we will also identify new opportunities and strategies for reallocation. This has been a long-standing priority for Iowa State, and now we're going to take our commitment to the next level. I announced as part of our 5-year tuition proposal that Iowa State will implement annual cost reallocations equal to 2.25% of our general fund budget. That puts our reallocation target for FY19 at $16.2 million. I've already begun meeting with our shared governance groups to discuss reallocation efforts. We are committed to making tough decisions on what we should be doing as well as what we should stop doing, and then reinvest those savings into our academic mission. An example from last year illustrates this commitment. We have become increasingly efficient with our curriculum. Last year, we eliminated a net 18 courses while still serving more students than ever. In addition to the individual savings activities and our reallocation efforts, we are also actively working to control costs related to employee health care. Accordingly, in 2014, we began participating in the Wellmark Accountable Care Organization program for self-funded employers. This program incentivizes medical providers to deliver high-quality care that improves outcomes for our employees. In turn, those better health outcomes result in lower claims costs for the university in the future. Specifically, in 2015, Iowa State's savings totaled $2.2 million. In 2016, those savings are estimated to be about $3.2 million. It's actions such as these that have enabled Iowa State to keep our premium cost flat for 5 straight years. Our elevated commitment to operating as efficiently as possible and effectively as possible, combined with our 5-year tuition plan, will ensure we have the resources to fulfill our mission at the level of quality our students and all Iowans expect and deserve. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and I'll attempt to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, President Allen. Are there questions? Larry?
Just a question. So when we started TIER, all this money was repurposed back into the universities, as you're doing. The different savings that you have identified here, do they go necessarily to a given college, or they just fall into the general fund?
Well, they all go to the general fund, but there's a process then to reallocate those accordingly where the most need is. The model we have, the budget model, is pretty complicated in terms of which academic program gets it, but there's a possible use of that across campus anywhere.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very good. Thanks. Yeah. I'd like to recognize President Harold for his comments.
Thank you, and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to continue our dialogue about cost takeout, TIER, and the implementation of the university's strategic plan. A few years ago, I was a faculty member at Harvard, and we taught our entrepreneurial students that entrepreneurship is a job that requires getting the mission done regardless of the resources you have at hand. The most important resources we all have are time and money. For over 20 years, through a series of actions and decisions across the state, the University of Iowa has not had sufficient resources to compete with its peer group. Nonetheless, like good, solid entrepreneurs, we have successfully gotten our job done. However, we have now reached, I believe, a limit, as our competitors have dramatically more resources per student than we have. You'll recall a few weeks ago during our last meeting, I highlighted the University of North Carolina, which is 5,000 students smaller than we are, has about the same mix, and gets $266 million more in total than we do per year, from 248 from its state and then 18 million more in tuition. That's just one example of many. Michigan is something similar, different mix. So are all the rest. We will continue taking costs out and redirecting them to student success and research, but it's now time, I believe, for the board and the state to do their part in this equation. Here is the agenda for the presentation I made a few weeks ago, detailing our strategic plan that is focused on student success and the realities of the very challenging competition we face from North Carolina, Michigan, Texas, and the rest. I will not repeat those slides today, but in one slide, here are the highlights of that conversation we had. At the UI, we've worked in a collaborative process with our shared governance and academic leadership on a plan that will move the UI towards excellence and the excellence our students, in fact, demand and their families expect. The UI strategic plan, if and when funded, will allow the university to compete nationally and will have a direct and profound impact on our students, whether undergraduate, graduate, or professionals. These students and graduates are needed in our state, as we recently saw in the Future Ready Iowa report. And as you know, we have communities across the state desperate for the well-trained professionals that graduate every year within the health sciences, law, business, engineering, and education. Without a nationally competitive education, these graduates will not become the leaders that Iowa's communities and companies need to thrive and grow. In particular, I'd like to point out that the investment we intend to make in research and scholarship on the UI campus, these resources directed towards enhancing our standing in research and scholarship will have a direct and profound impact upon our students and their success. Recruiting and retaining the faculty and scientists that will drive our research enterprise means more our students will have access to more opportunities, which I will describe more in depth in a moment. Finally, the other benefit of this investment would be an increase in the amount of both federally sponsored and non-federal research accomplished on our campus. This in turn drives more economic growth in the state as we hire more university employees, develop more intellectual property, and create new startups for the entire state. Iowa, I believe, desperately needs a program, a plan, a strategic plan for economic growth, and I believe our major research universities can play an important positive role. Simply put, we must move out of the notion that our universities are there to be cut and maybe their assets to be developed for the long term. This is a slide you haven't seen, but it basically summarizes the choices that are in front of us. I've watched us all gravitate to one portion of this chart, which is basically the y-axis, which is the tuition. The x-axis is also the state appropriation. There's a choice here. We, in our strategic plan, believe we need somewhere between $155 to $165 million in total. You can get there by the state totally funding that over the next 5 years, or the state funding none of that, and to the other extreme, all of it coming from tuition increases over the next 10 years. That would be roughly 10% a year. The red hatched area represents what we will do internally. We plan to take out $11 to $12 million per year. That's $55 to $60 million over the next 5 years in total, or roughly 35% of the total we think we need to compete in this challenging environment that we're in. That leaves us the lower dotted line, if you will, of 7% if none comes from the state, or $95 to $110 million in total over the next 5 years if all of it came from the state. And anywhere along the line will satisfy this, close this equation, if you will. So that is a broad perspective. I believe it's now time to have a conversation about a two-way street. In fact, over the last decade, the total amount has basically been going down when our competitors have been getting, at a minimum, 4% in tuition alone, let alone increases from their state, and probably more like 6 and 7 in total. Efficiency and productivity go hand in hand. Yet anyone who has operated a business understands that efficiency for efficiency's sake alone often decreases productivity. There's a balance that must be struck, which is built over years and, in fact, decades of work. When I came to the UI, I was pleased to find a culture, in fact, already in place of continuous improvement. This culture has allowed the university to be a leader not only within the higher education space, but in times, even in some cases, within the private sector. This culture of efficiency doesn't seem to fit the oft-stated narrative that universities are fat and bloated. Nothing could be further from the truth as it relates to the University of Iowa. For example, just focusing on the past 20 years, there are some numbers here on this slide I'd like to share with you. We have implemented over 50 IT cost efficiency initiatives over the last 20 years. Today, 8 purchasing agents each handle 150 million of purchased goods and services per year, which is almost double from where they were in 2011 on a per agent basis. And finally, we've executed over 2,007 Kaizen or continuous process improvement efforts across our campus. This culture of continuous improvement has allowed the university to be in a position of readiness when we achieve additional resources to direct them to where they'll provide the most productive use. The efficiency that exists in our back office, in fact, allows our faculty and staff to be more productive in teaching and in research. In order to understand some of these efficiencies deployed in the back office, I'd like to highlight 3 projects that have received significant recognition. The UI's Energy Control Center houses one of the most advanced and extensive utility tools available in a campus environment in the United States, and since its opening in April of 2010, has become a model for industry and higher ed. As noted on the slide, you can see the different entities who have visited the center to understand what we're doing on our campus. Cutting-edge energy management software enables energy engineers to optimize the production and distribution of steam, electricity, and chilled water while reducing costs and energy use. The university has also partnered with Microsoft Corporation's facilities managers after Microsoft successfully implemented FDD, or Fault Detection and Diagnostic Technology, at their Redmond, Washington campus. Microsoft agreed to partner with the university and support efforts to implement this emerging technology for the first time on a major university research campus. The UI campus provided the perfect place to put FDD's potential to the test in a complex, high-end medical and research campus environment. Finally, we are also pleased that our state auditor emphasized the UI's implementation of the shared services model as a best practice to follow. That is just another example of the DNA on our campus, a culture of continuous improvement. And then more recently, we implemented TIER. Focusing on TIER at Iowa, the UI has been able to reinvest a projected $16.6 million. This was especially important this past fiscal year as we dealt with the reduction in state support, yet continued to get our faculty salaries to average of our peer group. Without these reinvestments, we would have undoubtedly dropped again in the rankings and continued a slide that none of us want to see. The UI is in a national competition, and we need to invest new resources into our faculty and students in order to move forward with the type of university we all expect. One way to visualize that investment is the fact that when indexed for inflation, the UI has been spending $7,000 per student over the last 20 years, while our 4-year graduation rate has continued to climb and is now 30% higher than it was. This compares to today, in which the UI is spending still around $7,000 per student with a 4-year graduation rate just above 50%. The UI was able to impact the outcome from our students without increasing their costs through maximizing our internal efficiencies. In order to continuously improve this outcome, the UI will need to increase the inputs in order to avoid a plateauing or of the increased outcome we expect for graduation rates and GPAs. An additional part of that resource equation is what we do with our scarce resources in our back office. Simply put, the less we spend on overhead costs while directing resources to where they will help our students the most, the better we are. We as a university chose our strategic plan with a goal in mind of increasing our quality to benefit our students, the state, and nation. That choice came with subsequent actions that we have been executing internally. Internally, directing resources to support the strategic plan and managing down our expenses was a significant part of the budget process we've gone through over the last 12 to 18 months. This slide shows how we currently rank relative to all AAU publics, our Regent peers, all members of the Big Ten, and IPED's peers, which is a large data set of public universities. In all cases, we stack up well. The actions taken over the past several years is reflected in that the University of Iowa now operates 14.5% more efficiently than our peers. With a focus on student success, it's vital that we illustrate where we need to improve in order to focus our resources, the new resources as well as future resources. Here you will see how we stack up against key student success metrics versus our direct peers. Let me be clear about some of this data. While we're not at all satisfied with our current retention rate relative to our peers or four-year graduation rate relative to our peers, we are performing well above the national average of 81% for retention rate and 35% for four-year graduation rate. Net, we're okay, better than the average, but okay is just not good enough relative to this peer set. If performing at the national average is all that we aspire to, then our efforts will be made by those who came before us would all have been made in vain. We at the University of Iowa are driven to compete with the best in the country, and as such will continue to focus on our peer set and work to achieve beyond their average. This means we have work to do in order to deliver on the quality that our students and their families expect and deserve. While the efficiency and direction of our resources allows for greater production from our faculty, it is important to understand how we ask our faculty to spend their time. The Carnegie classification of institutions has been the benchmark used in the United States for higher education for decades. Carnegie was a classification the University of Iowa and Iowa State as R1 doctoral universities face, which is the highest research level in the country. As this classification, our faculty are expected to have an active research scholarship portfolio. In order to maintain this active portfolio, our tenure and tenure track faculty should be allocated, their time should be allocated in a 40-40-20 split. 40% for teaching, 40% for research and scholarship, and 20% for service. If we move our tenured faculty beyond these benchmarks, we will suffer in the evaluations by the AAU and other key accreditation standards throughout the United States. At the UI, we've therefore created different faculty criteria for different faculty types so that our academic leadership can more effectively manage the production of teaching, research, scholarship, and clinical work needed throughout the enterprise. Tenure and tenure track is the image that many of us, and only the image that many of us conjure up when we think about universities. But in addition to that traditional track, we have a research track in which the bulk of their time is spent on research and scholarship, as you'll see here on the right, compared to the 40-40-20 on the left I described a moment ago for tenure track. In addition, given the UI's healthcare role in Iowa and the nation, we also have a clinical track focused on the impact our faculty have in professional productivity, particularly in the medical area. That you'll see on the left. And finally, we have a track dedicated to just the instructional work of the institution. The flexibility that these separate allocations afford the institution are vital to delivery of our mission. Every 2 years, we report to you, our board, the effort of our faculty so we can understand how we are doing based upon this Carnegie classification. As you can see from this table, the UI's historical average in all areas are above the expectations set forth by the Carnegie classification. Put another way, our faculty are spending more time in the classroom, in the lab, and in service than is required of them under their specific contracts with us. This is a testament to the culture and the dedication of our tenure and tenure track faculty to the mission of teaching, research, and scholarship at the University of Iowa. You also know, because I often hear this in cocktail conversations, that no one's working at all or teaching at all. Take a look at the chart. On average, our faculty are spending, last time we did the report, and I think we have another report on this coming to you in a few months, they're spending 57.24, I believe, 27, hours per week. An outcome of the dedication illustrated in the previous slide is shown in this graph. Since 2007, we've seen almost a 50% increase in citations per tenured and tenure-track faculty. This becomes even more impressive when you consider that the UI has had a reduction in the total number of tenure and tenure-track positions over the same time period. Simply put, our faculty are producing more high-quality research and scholarship during a time of constricting resources on our campus. The issue that we now face is that we don't have enough tenure and tenure-track faculty to continue providing enough scholarship. A lack of tenure and tenure-track faculty is especially apparent when we look at our production of federal research and scholarship. While the UI is in the 35th percentile in federal research in comparison to the AAU institutions, when normalized by the number of faculty, the UI is punching well above our weight. In other words, our faculty are more productive. As such, the UI looks better than it should in the race for federal research dollars. If the UI could add more faculty, the UI could produce even more research and scholarship, benefiting our students and the state's economy. So, to sum all this up, if we're able to move towards excellence in implementing our strategic plan, choices are going to have to be made, and an important choice on tuition. We have a good handle on what it will cost to implement our strategic plan. We understand what we can do internally with incremental resources in order to invest in the strategic plan over the next 5 years. And we're now at a point where a choice will need to be made about what quality of institution we want to be and how we will support the success of our students. Increasing tuition is not at all easy, and it's not something that any one of us wants to do because of the impact it has on our students and their families. The proposed plan does ensure critically needed predictability and affordability, especially when compared to our peers. However, we certainly understand the challenges related to increased tuition. That is why we're committed to maintaining our focus on first-generation students and increasing our need and merit-based student aid. A careful balance between an increase in tuition and appropriate aid will help mitigate the impact upon those that may be struggling with the cost. I strongly believe we're headed down the correct path with our plan to better student outcomes, but simply we must have more resources. I'd be glad now to take any questions you might have.
Questions? Regent McKibben?
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate that. As was announced a week or so ago, the legislative request for $16 million for need-based aid, I think $5 million of which would go to the University of Iowa. Would you just maybe go through and emphasize the importance of that in terms of your long-term plan, and so that citizens of Iowa know and understand what we're talking about in a little more detail and how that will affect your funding in the year to come? Sure.
Let me first of all start with the overall perspective on financial aid. We spend currently a little over $100 million a year on student financial aid. I think the best way to think about it is it falls into three categories. First category is one that we created a few years ago that's basically what I refer to as legacy, and it's about $20 million. Doesn't have anything particularly to do with merit, i.e. grades and performance. Doesn't have anything to do with family financial need. It just was there for Iowans. The balance of about $77 million really fall into the categories of merit and need. What will happen as we take up tuition, very importantly, is that we would also need about roughly, we discount in total, about a little over $100 million says, on average, our students pay about 30% less than the list price for tuition. So as we talk about, for example, 7% increase in in-state tuition, the real increase on average will be something 30% less. It'll be more like 5.5% in reality of what will hit our books because no one is on average paying the full list price. As we take tuition up, however, we need to also set aside an increased amount for student financial aid. That only makes sense. And so that $5 million, if we take tuition up, will help obviously offset that. The other thing I would say in this whole conversation is that we've made a very serious commitment at the University of Iowa to keep our first-generation students at least 20% of our incoming student body, undergraduate student body. This past class that we admitted was 23%. By the way, I'll point out it was a little bit smaller than we've had historically. Had 23% first-generation students, had more Iowans than we've had in recent years, and had the highest academic standing on top of it all. So that mix can be all put together, this notion that if you open it up just to Iowans or open up to a lot of first-generation students or even go smaller, you will suffer academically. It's just not true. You have to be careful in the process. But as we continue to keep our first-generation students over 20%, we're also going to need to support them fiscally. In fact, right now, on average, I've got the exact data behind me here, but our first-generation students are paying well less than $2,000 in-state tuition versus the $8,600 list price. They even pay less. So the commitment we have to first-generation students is also an important part of this conversation, not only because of tuition, but also because of the support systems one needs to be put in place in our institution to acclimate them to our sort of academic rigor. I grew up in a community, my first calculus class had more people in it at Purdue than I had in my graduating class. And that's a shock. And learning how to deal with that and building the out-of-classroom support mechanisms for these types of first-generation students, because they don't have it in their families. And so picking that up is really an important part of the transition to keep our graduation rates. And so it's a system, I would say. Part of it is our tuition. As it goes up, we need to continue to provide more financial aid. That's logical. But also, as we make the commitments about what type of student body we want to have and what type of support we want to have to Iowans and first-generation students, there's a fiscal need of that. There's also a support system that needs to be put in underneath all that. It all goes together. I hope I answered your question. It's important, very, very important part of the question.
You did, and that's what I wanted to hear, and I think the message that we're delivering is how important that $5 million is to meet the goals that you have set for first-generation students. That the $12 million we're requesting for the 3 universities and the $5 million you're specifically requesting at UI is extremely, if I heard it right, extremely important with your plan for the next year.
It's vital. It's vital. I think at the end of the day, we sometimes get lost in the issue of the size and complexity, and it's all about faculty, and it's all about students. And if you're thinking about students, what type of student you want to have, who matriculates, how you support them, not only financially, but also with the rest of on-campus support mechanisms, all connected. $5 million is critical because of the commitments we're making to Iowa, to first-generation students, and the incomes and backgrounds that they're bringing with them to our campus.
And it'll help to get us off being the number one lowest in the nation, we hope.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Did I understand you to say that the first-generation students make up 20% of the freshman class?
23, and the one we just admitted, correct.
Okay, right. And that, you tell me before I say it, how much are they spending on average for tuition only?
Yeah, this class we just admitted.
Yes.
We had. So I get the right. We have. Hold on. They're paying average out-of-pocket tuition paid by the first generation. Those 23% was $1,117.
So we are really working hard to keep them on various levels.
Well, working very hard. That was just the admissions. We're working very hard
Right.
just to get them in to the system.
Okay.
And so, and there's several calculations. Some of them were eligible for merit.
Right.
So they're good students, and they're eligible for that. Vast majority of them, when we looked at their income statements, the balance sheet that they have to submit for the federal forms, the resulting gap that we had to provide was $1,117. That was the opposite of that.
Right, okay, all right,
Yep.
thanks.
Yeah. And I think that often, we talk about, just if I may editorialize this, I hear people say, well, students can't afford it. We have a process in place that can't afford increased tuition. We have a process in place that's student-specific, family-specific, that actually works hard to figure out how to close that gap of putting together federal scholarships, Pell Grants, our own set of capabilities that we have in place. And so I just kind of balk at, yeah, I know when we take tuition up, it's important and it's hard. On the other hand, to say that no one can afford it is, you know, I don't think the facts wouldn't bear that out. We actually will bend over backwards to make sure people can get. And why do we do that? I think we also need to remember, this is part of our democracy. The more we educate people, the better citizens they are. That's been going on for 150 years at our institution. And so it's that philosophy that says, as a public institution, we have a real obligation to bend over backwards to help close these fiscal gaps we're creating.
How, in the last few years, how is the retention rate of that specific group of students?
It depends. And I'd have to go carve that out. I don't know if, Laura, you have that. I get that. I'll get that for you. But it depends because they come with different RAI classifications.
Okay.
So the ones that are coming at well above the average are doing just fine,
Right.
as long as we get them through the orientation system. The ones at the bottom echelon, as we've discussed in some other meetings, we can do better, and they can do better. I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Regent Butker?
Thank you, and thank you for a great presentation. I want to call attention to the rankings and reputation chart here. And looking, something that has always concerned me is the four-year graduation rate.
Regent
And
Butker,
I understand where.
This slide, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Right. Got it.
So what is UCLA and Michigan, Chapel Hill, what are they doing to get those high four-year graduation rates that we are not? I mean, we're improving.
We've
I get it,
improved,
but
as you can see.
what is it they're doing?
Here's the chart. The lower line on this chart shows you how we've improved every year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
However, relative to the competition, we still have a big gap. I would say there are two clusters of things. First and foremost, they have really good support systems in place: mentoring, tutoring, counseling, the adjustment from first generation that I was describing for the last 10 minutes. They have those types of systems in place. So they have, simply put, more resources that they put behind it. But it's not just money. It's the people and programs. I met a lady 2 weeks ago and spent some time with her, and she is actually a tutor that we have in our system. And so when somebody needs remedial work in the sciences, in her particular area, she coaches them one-on-one. Well, that's expensive. That's one-on-one. But putting those types of systems in place are really, really important, particularly in the first 2 years to get people through the big trauma I went through in calculus. I think we all know the type of support system we put in place for our student athletes, because our student athletes have higher graduation rates, higher GPAs than our student body at large, and they're the top in the Big Ten. And that system we've been staring at and said, oh, why don't we have a similar system in place for our student body at large to get them through? Because it's not an issue that somebody's not going to get through. It's an issue that how much time we need to spend with them to help them get up over the hurdles. So I think the first thing is these other institutions have those types of systems. Secondly, I think they're actually more selective. We don't like to say that, but I think they actually get to this point by the bringing people in with higher SATs and higher GPAs and higher, and so and we've chosen not to go down that path. We said, no, we want to be open. The public word is important in this equation. But then I would remind us, please understand that to do the job that's required to make sure they not only get through the system, but they get through with a top-notch, world-class education, says that we may need to do a little more work. I know it's more work than we're currently doing, but maybe more work than even some of these other students are doing because of the incoming students that we are matriculating. Make sense? Thanks.
I just wanted to comment that I shared that calculus trauma with you. We have something in common. Now, I know the next person we're calling on didn't have any trouble in calculus. So, but
Regent Richards, please, we'll just let President Nook handle the calculus.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
Yeah.
You and I
Right,
won't
you
go
bet.
back to remedial courses.
Yeah. I guess we've already recognized President Nook.
I had more kids in my freshman calculus class than I had in my graduating class, too.
Yeah.
But I only had 35 kids in my graduating class.
Right button goes forward, left
Okay,
goes back.
great, thanks. First of all, thank you and welcome. It's a privilege again to
to be in front of you and talk a little bit about some of the efficiencies that the University of Northern Iowa has come up with, the ways that we've improved productivity and rededicated some of those dollars that we found through our efficiencies. I do want to point out that, you know, the tier study in particular that we're talking about and looking at came in 2014, and after a significant reduction in budget around 2010, we saw many efficiencies occur before this time period. And so we were pretty lean at that point, went into the efficiencies, and clearly found some big savings, some ways to reorganize, to rethink about our organization that have continued to find additional savings. Almost all of what we'll be looking at today are the things that we've realized 2014 on. With that, just a summary of the things that we have been able to save. Total savings of about $16.4 million, most of that coming from operations at 11.8, facilities a little over $4 million, personnel savings relatively small at $420,000. I'll break each of these down and we can look at them in a little more detail. With the operational efficiencies, most of those have really come in savings in our renegotiated bonds. As everyone knows, we've been living in sort of charmed times when it comes to the interest rates and things, and our institution has taken advantage of that. These are split about 50-50 between ABRB and auxiliary funds, about $5 million each. The ABRB are 5.7, just about 5.7, and the auxiliaries at about 5.1 million each. We also have some information technology has reduced about $852,000 in the past 2 years. This really is through the centralization of our IT programs, bringing them together. They were spread between colleges and in some cases departments and or schools, brought it centrally. In doing that, we also had some increased efficiencies in purchasing through working more closely with joint contracts across the campus, pulling our data centers together, coordinated cybersecurity strategies and initiatives, mobile printing services, and then reallocation of the IT salaries to host department and department reductions in support staff in particular. In our student health clinic, we've also streamlined our business operations and processes, and in recreation services, streamlined the pro-travel and procurement card business, as well as several others. Within athletics, the savings have been almost entirely from moving into electronic processes from human processes, electronically scanning documents, which has eliminated a lot of hard copies and the movement of those hard copies, transitioned all of our donor communications to email and social media, electronic distribution of team media guides, and the student-athlete handbook, so we don't have those printing costs, we don't have the shipping costs. Then utilizing online event registration with credit card processing, so we don't have to have people standing in lines and someone standing there to help them. And then created an online community outreach form to centrally locate and track community services. Also in the Department of Residence, you can see here, secured a joint contract. This is with UNI, ISU, and the University of Iowa as a prime food vendor that we estimate a savings of about $160,000 to our campus alone. In the facility savings, our efficiencies totaled $3.7777 million. A lot of this is in various places, but we've consolidated our evening and summer programming so we could turn down our HVAC system, save some energy costs there. Other energy conservation projects, a lot of these have been in the reduction of the use of steam and electrical usage, amount to about $178,000. We were also able to find some savings with the reduced amount of time to complete renovation tasks, especially the Schindler Education Center, projected savings there. As you can see, we had electrical ongoing of about $73,642 per year, steam annual reductions of $110,272 for a total reduction in energy costs because of that renovation of almost $184,000 annually. Our personnel savings, and again, this is only over the last 2 to 3 years since 2014, we've radically reduced our adjunct pool and costs, really just the costs, moved that down to about $300,000 a year. We've also created some single point contact for all of our academic searches, saving us about $50,000 annually on the search process, and then utilizing tutoring and academic services for a savings of about $19,000 annually as well. With that, I'll take questions.
Questions? Larry? Regent McKibben?
Excuse me for asking all the questions to the rest of my colleagues here. However, since I'm in the tuition and the tier, why, there are some things that pop out once in a while. And of course, that's what happens with a former lawyer and senator. I'd like to talk. What I want to say, and I'm speaking not only to you, but the other two presidents and their staff that's here, the savings that you're talking about are ongoing. And the other thing that I've heard, and I've heard this from all three universities, TIER started the plan and started the process, but the cultural change that we see at all three universities and the collaboration at all three of our universities, I just want to say it's phenomenal. It really is. The leadership team, and I'm looking at leaders here that have led this for 4 years and gone forward. But I also want everyone on the board to understand, you know, we're well past here in many, many areas at the three universities, and I'm sure you would say the same thing as I see here at the University of Northern Iowa, as you've put down. They're well past it, and what I think is exciting for us in an efficiency manner and a cost savings manner that we're going to have at our three universities is that the numbers are just going to continue to climb. And when we get a report in 2018, vis-a-vis the prior reports in 17, 16, 15, citizens of Iowa and everybody is going to understand that you're doing the job, and all of you are doing the job of, because it's absolutely necessary. It had to be necessary to maintain the quality that we have at our universities. Absent you all doing the work that you're doing, and based on the funding that we've unfortunately not gotten from the state of Iowa, I can't imagine what the numbers in our relationship to our peer groups would be absent that. Simply, we don't even want to talk about that or think about it as far as I'm concerned. But I just think, and I want everybody here to know, my colleagues on the board, we started this a few years ago, but it has been it's been jumped on and taken, and the cultures have changed. And what I'm excited about is that this is going to be a long-term cultural change at the public universities in the state of Iowa, and all Iowans ought to be proud of that.
Yep, thanks. I guess I'd make 2 points. One, you know, looking specifically at TIER, and just as an example, looking at our IT operation, the TIER study said that if we took on the things that they suggested, we'd end up at about $170,000 in savings, and we ended up with $856,000, right? So that's a tremendous overachievement, is one way to look at it. I think the other thing that my colleagues and I have presented here is that, you know, efficiencies are something we've always been looking for. We found some, it's easy to go back to 2010, at least at our institution, and to see what we have done since then. You can certainly go back further than that. I think the TIER study in particular outlined some things in shared services and other operational things that we could focus on and have some direct impact that without that sort of focused look can be difficult to do. We've looked at and we've kind of adopted that mentality, those frameworks, processes, and rolled them into an ongoing quality improvement and efficiency improvement, right? And I want to make sure that we don't ever lose track of the quality improvement with the efficiencies, right? If we can make a whole bunch of efficiency improvements and lose quality, and that won't help us at all. We've got to always track our quality and make sure it's going the right direction as we work on these efficiencies.
And with that's a great way, a segue into exactly what all three of our universities and our presidents and their staff is working on. And I think Iowans can be proud of the quality that they're working on at all three universities, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any further comments? One of the most common questions I get is, what sort of documentation do we have that the universities are working to improve and operate more efficiently? And I think that we've seen some examples today. Does anybody have a running total of what the total of the three universities?
Actually, I had a meeting.
I'm playing straight man for you. No.
We had a meeting. We had a meeting this morning. It was exactly the same question. They will tell you exactly the same question I asked. And by the time, and you gentlemen can correct me, but I think the number was somewhere between $55 and $60 million.
Yeah, came to about 56 to 57. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, are there any other further questions? And Superintendent Gettle is not on the agenda today, but if anybody had any questions for him, it would be entirely appropriate. We didn't ask you to do a presentation, so I'm not expecting you to do anything. But are there any other questions for the presidents or for their staff? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. At this point, I'd like to recognize Brad Berg.
Thank you, President Richards. For the board's consideration today is the operating and other appropriations request for fiscal year 2019 that totals $622 million. The information is contained in the docket, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Berg? Thank you. A motion and a second are required to approve the operating and other appropriations request for fiscal year 2019 as outlined in the docket item, and to authorize actions by the designated Regent staff to seek collaboration and partnerships between Regent institution and other sectors of state government. Is there a motion to so do that?
I so move.
There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We'll have a roll call vote. Regent Bates,
Yes.
Regent Butker,
Yes.
Regent County,
Yes.
Regent Dakovich,
Yes.
Regent Dunkel,
Yes.
Regent Johnson,
Yes.
Regent McKibben,
Yes.
Regent Sahai,
Yes.
Regent Richards votes yes. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Is there any other business to come before the board? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.